Get rid of that. Okay, it is 4:06 and we're going to get started with our class for today, reading 3, live class on November the 16th. Go away. Thank you. Okay, we start every class with a check-in. How are you doing today? Yeah, I hear ya. I think I'm on that boat as well. Here's the class rules and objectives for today. The rules, as always, are no disrespect to other students or the teacher. Participate in class discussions and mute your mic when necessary. Since there's only one person on, just mute it if there's background noise. And our objectives today, as always, we're going to review the main learning objectives for the course. Then we're going to talk about questioning, part 1. We'll have part 2 on Friday. And then hopefully get to a discussion of what do you want to learn. Lesson for today. Okay, these are the 4 parts of reading. Starting at the top, they build on each other as they go around. Decoding. Decoding is sounding out words, knowing root words and prefixes and suffixes so that you can say words that you don't know when you come across them and you can sort of figure out what they mean. That's the most basic part of reading, figuring out words, right? One small part. It builds into vocabulary where we learn about context clues, which is how often we have to figure out what the word means if we don't know it. And we want to look at not just the definition, what it means, but the connotation, which is the feeling behind it. If there's a value judgment that it carries, or if it's an angry word or something like that. So, talked about decoding, figuring out words that you don't know, vocabulary, learning how to figure out what they mean and what the feeling behind them is, the connotation. The next piece of reading is fluency, which has to do a lot with reading out loud. It's reading at the correct rate, not too fast, not too slow, reading with good inflection, and knowing what to do when you come across punctuation. Do you pause? How long do you pause? Does your voice go up or down? Those things. And even though it's reading out loud, it helps with reading to yourself as well, because your brain picks up the tricks of reading out loud and you sort of read out loud in your head, if that makes sense. It helps you understand what you're reading. And finally, it all builds up into comprehension, understanding what you're reading, where you get inferences. There are things that are not directly stated, but are referred to. You can see the big picture of what you're reading, and you can understand the structure of it, why it's structured that way, things like that. So those are the 4 parts of reading. And these are the 6 reading skills that I like to try to instill in the students in this class. Previewing what you can tell before you start reading. Visualizing how you can see what you're reading going on in your head. Questioning, which we're talking about today, which is asking questions about what you're reading. Why did she say that? Oh, who is that? What does that word mean? Things like that. Summarizing, so that when you come back to your book after being away from it for a day or so, you can summarize in your head what's happened, really short and sweet, just the main events, main characters, summary. Predicting, the type of questioning that has to do with what's going to happen in the future of the text. You can make predictions about what's going to happen, and that helps you understand what's happening now. And monitoring. Monitoring is when you pay attention to whether you're actually understanding what you're reading or not. You could be reading the same page over 3 times and not getting anything out of it. I know I do that. And suddenly I just have to sort of snap out of it. That's monitoring. And you say, wait a minute, I'm not understanding what I'm reading. I have no idea what I just read. I'm going to go back, read it again, paying attention. So that's monitoring. And those are the 6 reading skills. So on to today, questions. I want to start with this slide about questions and making sense of the world, just as a background about why we question. So from a very young age, children actively strive to make sense of their world through constant questioning. The ability to ask questions comes naturally for young children, such as these questions from a group of 5-year-olds watching a fly. How do flies walk? Why do they have webs on their wings? Do flies have hair? Have they got sisters and brothers? How do they stick to the walls upside down? How do they know they're in trouble? We ask questions to make sense of the world. This is 5-year-olds, but as we grow up, we still do it. We just do it in our head. And most of the time, we're not even aware that we're doing it. But we're constantly asking questions to make sense of things we come across. So, now it's going to get a little technical. Types of questions that you might ask about a text. So educators have traditionally classified questions according to what is called Bloom's taxonomy. Big word. It's a hierarchy of increasingly complex intellectual skills. So a hierarchy, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that word. That means something that's from high to low or low to high, like the hierarchy at work is you and your manager and your boss, and then the boss's boss. That's a hierarchy of increasingly complex skills, intellectual skills. So it has 6 categories. So we're going to start with the least complex skill up to the most complex. That's the hierarchy of it. Knowledge is just recalling data or information. So if I told you Asian small-clawed otters are the most vocal species of otter, and then 2 days later I asked you what species is the most vocal of all otters, and you could say Asian short-clawed otters. That is knowledge. That's just recalling the data or the information. Very important, but it's not very complex. You just sort of memorize things. Comprehension is understanding the meaning of what you know. So that's not something you can memorize. That's a lot of what we talk about in reading class. Comprehending the text, understanding what's going on, what's the meaning of what we're reading. That's comprehension. Application is using the concepts in new situations. So when you apply something, you apply it to normal life, usually. So something that you've learned in class, then you come across a situation in life where you can actually apply that knowledge. That's a little more complicated than just understanding it, being able to apply it. Next is analysis, where you separate concepts into parts. One example, easy example, setting, the idea of the setting of a book. You can break it into parts being, where is it? When is it? What's the mood? Those are the three parts of setting. So being able to separate the concept into parts and look at those parts individually and how they go together as a whole, and distinguishing between facts and inferences. So between things that are said specifically outright in the text and things that you can infer or guess from what the text says. Next is synthesis, which is sort of the opposite of analysis in a way. It's combining parts to form new meaning. It's a higher complex intellectual skill. It's very important. Probably do it throughout life without knowing that you're doing it. But combining different parts of your knowledge together so that they mean something new. That's called synthesis. And then evaluation is what it all leads up to, which is making judgments about the value of ideas or products. So once you understand it and you can apply it and you can analyze it, you can make an evaluation about it. What's the value of it? Notice value is in the middle of evaluation. It's the root word. And another way of looking at it is some researchers have simplified classification of questions into lower and higher cognitive questions. Cognitive just means having to do with thinking. So lower cognitive questions are facts. They're closed questions, like yes or no questions, for example. They're direct. They ask you to recall knowledge. Those are, like we talked about with knowledge there, a little bit of comprehension. Those are the lower cognitive questions, recalling information. Higher cognitive questions are open-ended, so they could have any answer. They're interpretive. You can interpret the question in different ways. You interpret it one way or the other. Evaluative. So again, you're placing value on some things. What's of value and what is not. Inquiry, which is asking deep questions. Inferential, using inferences. And synthesis, combining ideas. And that involves the mental manipulation of information to produce or support an answer. I know that's all really complex language, but hopefully I was able to break it down. What we start with is knowledge, being able to recall information, and we move on to higher skills where we can manipulate that information in our head to answer deeper questions. Then there is a type of question called critical literacy questions. And this goes beyond the questions that you would ask yourself about the text, like what is happening? Who is this character? What does this word mean? What is this cultural reference? I mean, I'm reading a Russian novel right now, and I don't understand everything they say because I'm not Russian. So those kinds of questions are your normal reading questions. These are called critical literacy questions because they're about basically the author of the text, how the text was written, why it was written, things like that. So some examples. What does the writer of the text want us to know? And how can we check the facts? So is the author trying to get information across to us, and how do we know if it's true or false? Why has the author portrayed the characters in a particular way? So why are some characters portrayed one way and other characters another way? It's getting into the author's head and trying to figure out what they were meaning when they wrote it. What view of the world is the text presenting? So every text, every person has what's called a world view, which is how they make sense of the world. It involves things like, do you believe in God? Do you believe in fate? Do you believe in karma? What is the purpose of life? Those big questions. So can you tell sort of what the worldview of the author is? Can you tell what kind of person, what their interests and values are of the author? How does the text depict age, gender, cultural groups? So then you're looking for bias, prejudice, racism, ageism, things like that, that might be embedded in the text that you have to sort of tease out so you're aware of them. And whose views are excluded instead of included in the text. So knowing what's not in the book is just as important as knowing what is in the book. So maybe it's a book all about women and there are no male views in it. What does that say? Maybe it's it doesn't have any views from a specific culture that's important to what it's talking about, but it doesn't talk about those views. Why are they excluded? Why didn't they talk about them in the text? Is there a good reason? Things like that. Those are critical literacy questions. Okay, so that's the wordy intellectual questioning of today's class. The last thing I want to do is ask, what do you want to learn in reading 3? I mean, you're only going to retain knowledge if you're interested in it, if you think that it's worth learning. So I want to be able to teach you what you think is worth learning. I know that what I teach you is going to be valuable on the TABE and in the rest of your life and your career, but I want you to be able to own it as well and say, yes, I need to know that. So is there anything that you want/need to learn, or is there any way in which you learn that you want to talk about so that I can tailor the lessons to hit those topics and in those ways so that people learn more?